Congratulations, Vivienne, for saving the family home. The banner stretched across my parents' front porch, blood-red letters on white fabric. My sister stood beneath it in her emerald dress, accepting applause from relatives who had no idea that every mortgage payment, every saved penny, every sacrificed dream had come from my military paycheck. 3 years, $84,000. And they gave her the credit with a banner big enough for the whole neighborhood to see. But that wasn't even the beginning of their betrayal. When my mother looked straight at me across the dinner table and declared, "You're not half the woman your sister is," the words landed like a blow I'd absorbed too many times before. The fork in my hand stopped moving for just a heartbeat, and I could see the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes as she turned toward Vivienne. My older sister, the family's shining star. Vivienne sat there with that practiced smile, as if she'd just been awarded another invisible trophy. Normally, I would have just continued eating, swallowing down the bitterness along with my food, keeping silent until I could slip away after dessert. That was our family's unspoken rule. They would sing Vivienne's praises for being brilliant, successful, practically perfect in every way, while I played the forgotten supporting character in the background. But that particular evening, something inside me finally snapped. I pushed my chair back slowly, deliberately, and the scraping sound of wood against tile sliced through the dining room like a blade. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lose control. I simply looked at my mother with perfect composure and said, "Then let her cover the mortgage payments for you." The words detonated like a bomb in the middle of our family dinner. Vivienne's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My mother's eyes went wide with shock, but it was my father's face that told the real story. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly you'd think he'd seen his own ghost. His voice cracked when he stammered, "Mortgage? What mortgage payments?" Now, before you assume he was just being dramatic for effect, let me tell you something important. That confusion on his face was genuine. He wasn't acting. He honestly looked bewildered, as if the very concept of a mortgage payment was something from another planet. That's because for the past 3 years, I had been the one quietly, faithfully making sure those payments arrived on time. Not Vivienne with her law degree and corner office. Not my parents who claimed complete authority over our family. Me, the daughter they barely acknowledged. And until that moment, no one had ever dared speak this truth out loud. The silence that descended on us was so heavy it could have crushed the entire table into splinters. Vivienne blinked several times, her perfect smile melting away like snow in spring, and then she dropped her gaze as if this conversation suddenly had nothing to do with her. My mother leaned back in her chair, pressing her lips together tightly, already looking like she wished she could take back her cruel words. My father kept staring at me as if I'd just confessed to committing murder in our living room. Let me paint you the full picture, because in my family, Friday night dinners aren't optional. They're mandatory. It doesn't matter if I've been working 14-hour days at Fort Liberty, training soldiers and managing equipment worth millions. It doesn't matter if all I want is one quiet evening in my Fayetteville apartment. Just me and a cold beer and some peace. No. Every single Friday, I'm expected to make that drive to the suburbs, take my assigned seat at their long oak dining table and listen while my parents recite Vivienne's achievements, as if she's single-handedly saving the world. She's a successful lawyer. She bought a beautiful house with a 2-car garage. She has the kind of life my mother loves to brag about in her Christmas letters to distant relatives. And me? I'm the army captain with the steady paycheck they can conveniently lean on when bills come due, but never mention when friends ask about their daughters. Every time I tried to say I had duty that night or couldn't make it for legitimate reasons, my mother would blow up my phone with 20 missed calls, leaving voicemails that made missing one meal sound like I was abandoning the family forever. My father, trying to sound casual but meaning every word, would say, "This family has reserved a seat for you at our table. Don't you dare leave it empty." What he really meant was show up, sit down, keep your mouth shut, and play your role. So when my mother delivered that line about me not being half the woman Vivienne is, it wasn't just one isolated insult. It was years and years of constant comparisons, put-downs and dismissals all rolled into one crushing sentence. But instead of taking it silently like I always had before, I finally let the truth fly. And honestly, it felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for years. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift the instant those words left my mouth. Vivienne pretended she hadn't heard me, but the way her fingers tightened around her wine glass told me everything. My mother's fork clinked against her plate, and she gave me that familiar look she always used when she thought I was being overly sensitive or difficult. My father opened his mouth twice, closing it again each time before he finally managed to get the words out. Mortgage? What mortgage? His voice actually cracked a little, which would have been amusing if the situation wasn't so serious. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and uncomfortable, because for once in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself or apologize. I looked at Vivienne, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat, refusing to meet my eyes, then back at my parents. Finally, I leaned forward, rested my hand on the back of my chair for support, and spoke clearly. The one I've been covering for the last 3 years. That mortgage. If you're imagining jaws literally dropping to the table, you're not far off. My father blinked rapidly, as if I'd suddenly started speaking in a foreign language he'd never heard before. My mother's face tightened with tension, and Vivienne finally looked up, her mouth hanging half open but no words coming out. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't shaking with rage. I wasn't even particularly angry in that moment. I was steady, calm, maintaining the same composure I'd been trained to show when briefing a commander or delivering difficult news while in uniform. That calmness, that control, is what really rattled them. It's one thing when someone explodes in emotion. You can dismiss that as temporary feelings. But when someone states facts calmly, with no hesitation or uncertainty, those words stick like arrows. The strange thing is, this wasn't even about winning some dramatic family argument. It was about finally giving voice to what I'd been carrying alone for so long. I wasn't trying to score points or humiliate anyone at that table. I was simply done sitting there in silence while they handed my sister a halo she hadn't earned, and gave me scraps of respect, as if I should be grateful for even that much. The room stayed completely quiet. You could hear the tick-tock of the old grandfather clock, the one my mother always insisted gave the house its character and charm. Nobody moved a muscle. Vivienne continued staring at her plate as if it might provide an escape route. My father remained frozen in place, and my mother looked like she was trying to decide whether to scold me like a child or pretend this entire conversation had never happened at all. And me? I just sat back in my chair and waited because, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't the one in the hot seat. They were. My father's face was still drained of colour, but my mind had already travelled somewhere else, back to that winter night in 2020 when this whole nightmare began. It was one of those nights when the air outside felt sharp enough to cut, and the world was already falling apart from the pandemic that had everyone scared and confused. I had just gotten home from a late shift at Fort Liberty, still wearing my uniform pants and an army t-shirt, flipping through reports on my laptop while trying to convince my exhausted body that I wasn't too tired to eat something. That's when my phone started buzzing non-stop across the kitchen counter, Mom's name lighting up the screen over and over. She never called that late unless something was seriously, terribly wrong. When I finally picked up, her voice was shaking with tears. "Marlo, we might lose the house. Your father's contract fell through completely. We don't have enough for the mortgage payment this month. If the bank doesn't receive the payment, they'll send us a foreclosure notice." I just stood there in my small kitchen, staring at the blank wall, as if her words needed to bounce around several times before they could land properly in my brain. Mom sobbed harder into the phone. "Please, just this once. Help us keep the roof over our heads. After this month, we'll figure something out. I promise." I could have said no. I had every right to remind her that I had my own plans, my own dreams, that I'd been saving for years to buy a small condo near the base, something that would finally be mine. That as a captain, I wasn't exactly swimming in money either. Instead, I took a deep breath that felt like swallowing glass and said, "I'll transfer the money tomorrow morning." The relief in her voice was instant and overwhelming. She kept repeating thank you and just this once, as if she was trying to convince herself more than me that this would be temporary. When I hung up, I stared at my laptop screen where my bank account information glowed. Those numbers represented years of sacrifice, cutting corners on everything. Skipping vacations my friends took, living in cramped, run-down apartments just so that one day I could buy my own place and build something stable. Now that dream was taking a back seat to the sound of my mother crying over the phone, terrified of losing their home. The next morning, I logged into my online banking, typed in my parents' account number with fingers that felt numb, and hit the transfer button. The amount that disappeared from my account stung. Not because I didn't want to help my parents, but because I knew exactly what it was costing me in terms of my own future. But I told myself what any dutiful daughter would in that moment. Family comes first. This was an emergency. Things would get better soon. Except they didn't get better. Not even close. The following month brought another desperate call. Marlo, your father's business still hasn't recovered. Can you help us just this once more? She said it the same way as before, as if it was still temporary. As if she actually believed this would end soon. And I agreed again, pushing down the voice in my head, screaming that this was becoming a pattern. By the 3rd month, I stopped asking questions about their finances. By the 6th month, I had the payment scheduled to transfer automatically from my account to theirs. Because why put myself through the mental and emotional battle every single time? I watched my savings account drain steadily, month after month. Each time I saw that balance drop, I told myself, next month will be different. Next month, they'll be back on their feet. But the only thing that changed was my shrinking bank account. 3 months turned into 6. 6 turned into 12. By the 2nd year, I'd sent them enough money to buy a brand new truck with cash. Instead, all I had to show for it was the same tiny, worn apartment near base. Furniture that looked like it came from a college dorm room clearance sale. And a bank account that refused to grow no matter how many extra hours I worked. I kept waiting for acknowledgement, for some kind of heartfelt thank you at those Friday dinners. But every time I sat at that oak table, my parents praised Vivienne's career trajectory, her impressive cases at the law firm, the way she decorated her beautiful house in Wilmington with designer furniture. Me? Not a single word. No one said, "Hey Marlo, thank you for saving us from foreclosure." No one said, "We appreciate you putting your entire life on hold for us." Nothing. Complete silence about my sacrifice. There was one night, maybe a year into this arrangement, when my father called me directly. His voice sounded heavier than usual, weighted down with something I couldn't quite identify. "Marlo, I hate asking you again, but this month is particularly bad. If we lose the house, your mother will completely fall apart. She won't survive it." He promised, swore on everything, that this would absolutely be the last time. I didn't even argue. I just nodded to myself, staring out my apartment window at the parking lot full of cars that belonged to people who probably weren't bankrolling their parents' entire existence. I wondered how many times the last time was supposed to actually mean the last time. 3 years. 36 transfers. $84,000. That's what just this once eventually turned into. Every single dollar came straight out of my military paycheck. Pay that was supposed to help me build something solid for myself. Pay I earned by putting on that uniform every morning before dawn, saluting higher-ranking officers, working weekends when everyone else was relaxing, filling out endless reports that no one would ever read, and taking responsibility for soldiers and millions of dollars of equipment. None of that dedication mattered in my parents' house. In that house, I was still the lesser daughter, the one who would never measure up to Vivienne's shine. One weekend, Vivienne showed up to dinner practically glowing, scrolling through photos on her phone of her new house. "Look at these granite countertops, and the open floor plan, and this master bathroom." Everyone gathered around her like she was showing them the 8th wonder of the world. My parents beamed with pride as if she'd just discovered the cure for cancer. I sat there nodding politely, chewing my food mechanically, thinking about the fact that my money, my sacrifice, had been paying for the very house they were sitting in right at that moment. But no one knew. No one cared. That night on my drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white and my hands ached. I kept asking myself why I let it go this far, why I couldn't say no, why I kept putting them first when they never, ever put me anywhere close to the top of their priority list. The simple, painful answer was guilt. Every time my mother's voice cracked on the phone. Every time my father mentioned the possibility of losing the house. Every time they painted a picture of disaster. I felt like it was my duty as their daughter to step in and save them. But sitting there at that dinner table, listening to my mother tell me I wasn't half the woman my sister was, I finally realized that guilt was the only weapon they'd been using to keep me hooked. They leaned on me because I let them. And I let them because I couldn't bear the thought of being the daughter who let the family home disappear. I thought back to that very first phone call, the sound of my mother crying, the panic making her voice shake. I remembered the weight that settled in my chest when I promised her I'd help. I remembered the hope I had when I genuinely thought it would be just that once. And as my father sat there at the present dinner table, pale and stammering, all of those memories came rushing back like a flood that had been held back by a dam that finally broke. I kept my eyes locked on my father, but the numbers were already running through my head like a calculator that wouldn't stop. 3 years, 36 transfers, $84,000. Every single penny wired straight from my hard-earned paycheck into their account while I continued living in my cramped apartment, watching my own future shrink and disappear month by month. It's remarkable how quickly sacrifice can transform into routine, into something expected rather than appreciated. At first, I'd feel a sharp sting every time I clicked that transfer button. Then, after a while, that sting dulled into a kind of numbness. It wasn't that I stopped caring about the money. It was that I couldn't keep caring every single month without completely breaking down. So I automated it. The money left my account on the 15th of each month like clockwork, and I tried not to think about it. Except I did think about it. I thought about it every time I opened my banking app and saw my balance refusing to grow. There were so many things I wanted. Things that would have been completely normal for anyone my age to have. I wanted to buy a place of my own, to stop throwing money away on rent, to start building equity like every financial advisor says you should do in your 30s. I wanted to marry the man I was dating at the time, who had actually brought up looking at houses together once, his eyes bright with excitement about our future. But every time those conversations came up, I found myself dodging, making excuses because I knew my savings account was nearly empty. How could I explain to him that my money was disappearing into a black hole labeled family mortgage, a debt that technically, legally wasn't even mine? He didn't stick around to keep waiting. And honestly, I couldn't blame him one bit. He wanted a partner who could plan and build a future together, not someone silently bankrolling her parents while pretending everything was perfectly fine. So that relationship ended with a quiet, sad conversation on my couch. The kind when nobody raises their voice because both people already know it's over and there's nothing left to fight about. Meanwhile, Vivienne's life was the family's favorite success story, played on repeat every single Friday. She won her first major case at the law firm they toasted with expensive wine. She bought a house in the nice part of Wilmington they practically threw a parade in her honor. She renovated her kitchen with subway tiles and stainless steel appliances. Mom gushed about it as if Vivienne had built the entire house with her bare hands from scratch. I never said anything. I'd show up in my military uniform, sit at that table, eat my mother's cooking, which had lost all taste for me, nod along to their endless stories about Vivienne's accomplishments, and then drive home with my stomach in knots, not from the food, but from the silence I was forced to carry, the truth I couldn't speak. Every once in a while, I'd fantasize about dropping the truth right there at the table like a bomb, telling them it was me, not Vivienne, keeping their home from being seized by the bank. But then I'd imagine their reactions, the awkward stares, the immediate denial, the way they'd twisted into something I had chosen to do voluntarily so they owed me nothing. And I'd swallow the truth down like bitter medicine, like I always did. Still, it ate at me from the inside. Every sacrifice I made had a face, a concrete thing I'd given up. The weekend trip to Asheville with friends that I said no to because I couldn't justify the expense when I knew that month's transfer was coming. The master's program in finance I kept pushing off year after year because tuition felt impossible when I was hemorrhaging money. The nicer apartment with actual sunlight that I passed on when my landlord raised the rent, because I couldn't scrape together a bigger deposit. Each rejection, each no, each maybe next year was a reminder that I wasn't living for myself. I was living to keep a roof over my parents' heads while they told the world it was Vivienne who carried the family's burdens. There was one particular night I remember with painful clarity. It was a late shift at the office. Spreadsheets piled high on my desk. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. My phone buzzed. It was Dad. His voice was lower than usual, rough and almost raspy. "Marlo, I hate asking you again, but this month is especially bad. If we lose the house, your mother will fall apart completely. I promise, just this month. This is the absolute last time. Just this month." The same line he'd used every single time, like a broken record that skipped on the same phrase. I remember staring out the office window at the empty parking lot, streetlights creating pools of yellow light in the darkness. I felt both pity and anger simultaneously. Pity because my father sounded genuinely defeated, like a man who'd given up. Anger because I was once again the safety net, the emergency fund, the backup plan. I said yes like I always did, even though every instinct screamed at me not to. And that's the insidious thing about family. They know exactly which buttons to push to get what they want. Guilt, duty, loyalty, love, they wielded them all like weapons. It's not like they were holding a gun to my head, forcing me to transfer the money. But they didn't need to. They had my heart in their hands, and they knew exactly how to squeeze it. The total crept higher relentlessly. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. By the time I hit 84,000, I couldn't even process the number anymore. It had become abstract, like Monopoly money in a game I was losing. Except it wasn't a game. It was real money, my future, and it was gone forever. The worst part wasn't even the money itself. It was the complete invisibility of my sacrifice. Sitting there every week, listening to my mother brag endlessly about Vivienne's victories, while never once acknowledging the quiet sacrifice happening right under her nose. Watching my father beam with pride about Vivienne's career trajectory, while conveniently forgetting about the mortgage payments that magically appeared in their account each month. Hearing my sister talk about redecorating her living room with imported furniture, while my savings account bled out month after month, year after year. One Friday, Vivienne showed up practically bouncing with excitement, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Look at this backyard, perfect for entertaining, and the gardens." She passed her phone around the table like it was a trophy. My parents lit up as if she'd just bought the White House itself. I smiled politely, handed the phone back carefully, and bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. On that drive home, headlights flashing past on the dark highway, I realized something fundamental about my life. My entire adult existence was being mortgaged too. My future, my dreams, my relationships all mortgaged to cover someone else's mistakes and failures. And nobody even knew. Or worse, maybe they did know and simply didn't care. I pulled into my apartment complex, parked in my assigned spot, sat in the car with the engine still running, and stared at the dashboard. The smell of fast food from the bag on the passenger seat filled the car, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. My throat was too tight with unshed tears and suppressed screams. All I could do was sit there, gripping the steering wheel like an anchor, wondering how long I would let this continue to happen. Back at that dinner table in the present, staring at my father's pale, shocked face, I knew exactly how long it had been. 3 years, 36 payments, $84,000, and not a single word of thanks or acknowledgement. The silence after my revelation could have shattered glass. My father's lips parted as if he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. My mother shook her head slowly, like she was watching a child tell an obvious silly lie. "Marlo, that's not fair," she finally said, her voice trembling with what sounded like indignation. "We never asked you to do that." That line hit me harder than any physical blow. My chest burned with rage. My stomach flipped with disbelief. But I forced myself to keep my voice steady, controlled. "You did ask. 3 years ago. Then every single month after that. Maybe you didn't phrase it like a direct demand, but you knew exactly what those phone calls meant. You knew I would cave. You counted on it." Dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively, his voice low but sharp with accusation. "We appreciate you helping once or twice, but dragging this up here at the dinner table? That's disrespectful to this family." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, which clearly wasn't the reaction they were expecting. "Disrespectful? You've spent my entire life comparing me to Vivienne like I'm some cheap knockoff version of her. You've made me feel worthless and invisible. And now you're telling me I'm out of line because I finally tell the truth about what I've sacrificed." Vivienne shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting around the room like she was desperately hoping someone would rescue her from the blast radius of this confrontation. She didn't say a word. Of course she didn't. She never defended me. Not once in our entire lives. Mom's voice cracked as she tried again, grasping for control. "You're being too sensitive, Marlo. We've always been proud of you, but Vivienne's career is visible, tangible. People understand what a lawyer does. Your military service is different." I could feel the muscles in my jaw clench so tight it sent shooting pain up to my temples. "So the hours I work, the money I gave you, the entire life I put on hold, that's all invisible to you? Just because I don't have a shiny law degree or courtroom victories to brag about, my contributions don't count? They're worthless?" Dad slammed his palm on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump and rattle. "Enough. We're not turning a family dinner into some kind of financial audit. If you wanted thanks, you should have said something sooner. Don't twist this into an attack on us. I pushed my chair back slowly. Deliberately, the scrape of wood on tile cutting through the heavy air like a knife. I didn't want thanks, I said, my voice low but carrying clearly. I wanted respect. I wanted to matter in this family as much as your golden child. But I see it now with perfect clarity. No matter what I do, no matter how much I sacrifice, it will never be enough for you. I'll always be less than her in your eyes. The words came out steady, but inside I was shaking like a leaf in a storm. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat, threatening to choke me. My mother looked away, her fork still clutched in her hand, motionless. My father glared at me with a mixture of anger and something else, maybe shame, though he'd never admit it. Vivienne's face remained fixed in that awkward, frozen half smile like she'd just realized her pedestal wasn't as secure as she'd always thought. I stood up, grabbed my bag from the back of the chair with steady hands, and walked out of the dining room without looking back. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, past all those family photos where Vivienne's framed certificates and awards were always displayed front and center, while pictures of me in uniform were relegated to the corners, if they were there at all. I didn't stop to look at them. I didn't want to see one more piece of evidence of how little I mattered in this house. In my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, I realized I had just drawn a line I could never erase. I had said out loud what I'd been choking on for years, the truth that had been slowly poisoning me from the inside. And their response? Denial. Dismissal. A pat on the head like I was a child making up stories for attention. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual, as if the road had stretched while I wasn't looking. Every red light seemed to last an eternity. Every green light blurred past before I even noticed it had changed. My phone buzzed twice, once with a text from Mom, then one from Dad. I didn't look. I couldn't. I knew exactly what they would say. Something about me overreacting, being ungrateful, needing to calm down and apologize for my outburst. When I finally stepped into my apartment, my space, my sanctuary, I tossed my keys on the counter and collapsed into the chair by the window. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed truth crashing into me all at once like a tidal wave. I opened my laptop with shaking fingers, logged into my bank account, and navigated to the scheduled payments tab. The screen glowed with that same monthly transfer I had been funding since 2020. Right there, bold as daylight, like a monument to my silence and their exploitation. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. My heart raced like I was about to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. I clicked. A prompt popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? I hit yes without hesitation. And just like that, 3 years of obligation ended in the span of a single second. Relief didn't come immediately. At first, it felt like I'd cut off a part of myself. I sat back in the chair, staring at the confirmation screen, feeling numb. Then slowly, gradually, something else crept in. Not joy exactly, not yet, but something close to it. Freedom. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't tied to their financial lifeline. I wasn't their emergency fund anymore. I pulled out the folder I'd kept hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk, my insurance policy, my proof, every bank statement, every printed transfer slip, every piece of evidence organized meticulously by month. I laid them out on the table, papers covering every inch of the surface like a map of my sacrifice. The numbers stared back at me accusingly. $1,500. 1,000, 1,200, 2,000, month after month after month. The total at the bottom, written in my own careful handwriting, $84,000. I leaned forward, tracing the numbers with my finger, feeling their weight. That money could have been my down payment on a home of my own. It could have been graduate school to advance my career. It could have been a wedding with the man I'd loved and lost. Instead, it was buried in a house where I'd always been nothing more than a shadow. A ghost they could ignore until they needed something. But staring at those pages, I didn't feel only bitterness. I felt clarity, sharp and clean, like morning air after a storm. This was the evidence, the receipts, the unshakable truth they refused to acknowledge. They could deny it all they wanted, but numbers don't lie. Numbers don't care about family dynamics or golden children. And one day, I promised myself, they wouldn't be able to brush this off as my imagination. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into the folder with care, and placed it in the center of the table like a centerpiece. My apartment was silent, but not the suffocating kind of silence I'd grown used to. This silence was different. It belonged to me. I controlled it. I walked into my tiny kitchen, poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. My chest still ached from the confrontation, but the crushing heaviness I'd carried for 3 years felt lighter somehow. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my parents would call to apologize or double down on their denial. I didn't know if Vivienne would try to smooth things over with empty words or if the family dinners would simply continue without me, as if I'd never existed at all. What I did know with absolute certainty was this: I was done being invisible, done carrying weight that wasn't mine to bear, done sitting in shadows while my sister basked in stolen sunlight. And if my parents thought I would crawl back quietly, apologetically, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The morning sun sliced through my blinds and woke me before my alarm could go off. I rolled out of bed with a heavy head from processing everything, but a strangely light feeling in my chest, as if cancelling that recurring transfer had untied ropes that had been wrapped around my ribs for years. My apartment felt different too. It wasn't bigger or fancier, but it was mine in a way it hadn't been the night before. Truly completely mine. I brewed my morning coffee and sat at the dining table, staring at the folder of bank statements still sitting there like evidence in a court case. Part of me wanted to shove it back in the drawer and pretend none of this had ever happened, to go back to being the quiet daughter who never made waves. But another part of me, the louder part now, the part that had finally found its voice, wanted to keep it out as a reminder, not of what I'd lost to my family's greed, but of what I refused to lose anymore. Later that morning, when I logged into my account to check the balance, the absence of that scheduled payment felt like a victory all by itself. The 15th of the month would come and go, and this time my money would stay exactly where it belonged. No frantic midnight calls from my mother. No guilt-laden text messages with "just this once" haunting every word. The money would be mine to save, to spend, to build a future with. And for the first time in years, I could actually plan that future without watching it get drained away by my parents' failures. At work that day, I carried myself differently. I noticed it the moment I walked through the office doors. Uniform pressed perfectly, posture straight and confident, and a strange, quiet strength in my stride that hadn't been there before. My co-workers greeted me the same way they always did, but I didn't feel like the same person who'd left the day before. The weight of family secrets was gone, and I could finally breathe. Later that week, during a morning briefing, Colonel Reeves, my mentor, pulled me aside. He was one of those leaders who had seen everything combat deployments, logistics nightmares, soldiers cracking under impossible pressure, and nothing ever rattled his composure. "Captain," he said, looking me straight in the eye with that penetrating gaze of his, "you seem sharper lately, more focused. What changed?" I gave him a half smile, the first genuine one in weeks. "Cut some dead weight from my life, sir." He raised an eyebrow, then nodded once, knowing better than to pry into personal matters. "Good. Whatever it was, keep it that way. The military demands enough from us without carrying extra burdens. Don't give away more than you have to." His words resonated deeply. The army already demanded discipline, sacrifice, long hours away from any semblance of normal life, and deployments that yanked me away from building real relationships. And I had been doubling that weight by secretly carrying my parents' mortgage on top of everything else. Reeves was right. No one can keep giving until there's nothing left of themselves. At night, I started reclaiming the hours that used to feel stolen from me. I signed up for a boxing class at the gym near base, where the sound of gloves hitting heavy bags drowned out every bitter memory of being dismissed and diminished at that dinner table. I ran along the river trail near my apartment, my breath sharp and visible in the cold air, feeling more alive with every stride than I had in years. I even pulled out old applications for graduate school programs I'd shoved in a drawer years earlier when they felt impossible. Now I let myself imagine that door wasn't locked forever, that education and advancement was still possible for me. Money wasn't pouring in any faster than before military pay is what it is. But for the first time in 3 years, it wasn't pouring out behind my back either. Each paycheck became like a vote of confidence in my own future rather than a donation to my parents' past mistakes. The savings account that had been stagnant for so long finally started ticking upward. Slowly, yes, but the sight of those growing numbers made me feel steady and hopeful again. I'd be lying if I said the anger had completely disappeared. It hadn't. Some nights, I'd sit at my small table with those bank statements spread out like evidence of a crime, and I'd feel the sharp sting of every dollar lost. I'd think about the vacations I never took while my friends posted photos from beaches and mountains. I'd think about the apartment with actual windows and sunlight that I never rented. I'd think about the years I couldn't get back, the opportunities that had passed me by while I was too broke to grab them. And then I'd picture that banner they hung for Vivienne. That massive lie stretched across the front of the house for the whole neighborhood to see. Congratulations, Vivienne, for saving the family home. That image burned hotter than anything else, like acid in my chest. But instead of letting it crush me or send me spiraling into depression, I let it sharpen me like a blade. Anger, when channeled correctly, can be the most powerful fuel. Every jab in boxing class, I pictured that banner. Every late night working on logistics reports at the office, I remembered those Friday dinners where I was invisible. Every mile on the running trail, I pushed harder, faster, proving to myself that their dismissal wouldn't define me. My work performance skyrocketed. When I wasn't drained by secret payments and endless guilt, I had more energy to pour into my actual job. I volunteered for the tougher assignments that others avoided. I stayed late when supply chain problems hit unexpected snags. And when Colonel Reeves walked past my desk one night at nearly 10 o'clock and saw me piecing together a complex budget analysis for a multi-million-dollar equipment issue, he simply said, "This is why you'll go far, Captain. You don't fold under pressure." That single compliment meant more to me than any empty praise I'd ever received at a family dinner. It was real, earned through my own merit, not filtered through family politics or comparisons to my sister. Weekends became mine again to enjoy without guilt. I hiked mountain trails with friends from my unit, sat around bonfires under the stars and laughed harder and more freely than I had in years. For once, I wasn't cancelling plans because of money I didn't have. I wasn't making up excuses about being too busy when really I was just too broke from covering someone else's responsibilities. I could say yes to invitations without checking my bank balance first, without calculating if I could afford both a night out and my parents' mortgage payment. Even my relationship with Vivienne shifted, though not in any way she consciously realized. At the next family dinner, yes, I went one more time, just to see she was her usual self, talking about her high-profile clients, her recent kitchen renovation with imported marble countertops, all the glittering success that came with being the family's golden child. But when she glanced at me, maybe expecting the same quiet, submissive nods she'd always received, she found something different. A steady, unwavering gaze that didn't seek her approval or our parents anymore. I didn't snap at her or make cutting remarks. I didn't interrupt her stories or try to one-up her achievements. I just looked back at her with the calm confidence of someone who didn't need her validation or our parents' recognition anymore. It unsettled her visibly. She stumbled over her words, lost her train of thought mid-sentence, kept glancing at me as if trying to figure out what had changed. When dinner ended and Mom called after me as I grabbed my coat to leave, her voice carrying that familiar dismissive tone, "Marlo, you're not still upset about last week, are you?" She said it the way she'd always minimized my feelings, the tone that labeled me as overly sensitive, dramatic, difficult. I turned to face her, not angry, not shouting, just clear and firm. "I'm not upset, Mom. I'm done." "There's a difference." She blinked in confusion, as if the words were in a language she didn't speak. Done with what? Done being invisible. Done being compared. Done being the emergency fund. Just done. Maybe she didn't understand. Maybe she never would. But that was no longer my problem to solve. Driving home that night through streets wet with spring rain, I realized something profound and liberating. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I wasn't competing with Vivienne for our parents' approval that would never come. I wasn't waiting for my parents to suddenly wake up one morning and recognize my worth. I was building something that had absolutely nothing to do with any of them. My own career based on my merit, my own money that I controlled, my own future that I was designing. And as much as they tried to dismiss or diminish me, I knew this truth in my bones: the numbers didn't lie. $84,000, 36 payments, 3 years of sacrifice. That truth was mine, documented and undeniable. And one day, though I didn't know when or how, it wouldn't stay hidden in my apartment. But for now, I didn't need their applause or acknowledgement. The silence of my own apartment, the steady hum of a life I was finally steering for myself that was more than enough. The clatter of boots on the drill floor at Fort Liberty snapped me back to focus. But this time, I wasn't dragging the weight of family drama behind me like chains. I was sharper, quicker, more present in each moment. When you cut out the constant drain on your energy and spirit, you realize how much strength you actually have in reserve. Our unit was preparing for a major logistics inspection, the kind where one missed detail, one overlooked form could tank your entire evaluation and follow you for years. Normally, I'd be stretched thin mentally, distracted by thoughts of making rent after the transfer cleared, or wondering if I could even afford groceries if my parents called with another emergency. But standing there with the inspection checklist in my hand, I felt steady and clear. Every box was ticked perfectly. Every supply record was squared away. Every movement was deliberate and confident, Colonel Reeves noticed. He always did. That's what made him such an effective leader. After the inspection wrapped up successfully, he called me into his office. His tone was direct but not unkind. "Captain, you've got real initiative. You've been operating like an officer who wants more than just the minimum, more than just getting by. Have you thought about putting in for Fort Belvoir yet? There are opportunities opening up soon." The mention caught me completely off guard. Fort Belvoir meant proximity to Washington, D.C., higher visibility among military brass, bigger opportunities in finance and logistics operations. It also meant leaving everything I knew in North Carolina behind. But instead of hesitating or making excuses like I would have before, I felt that same steady hum of confidence inside me. "I've given it some thought, sir," I said. "When the opportunity comes, I'll be ready for it." He nodded once, the kind of nod that meant he believed me without question. "Good. Don't let it pass you by." Outside his office, the rest of the unit teased me good-naturedly for staying late again, for being the one who always went above and beyond. But I didn't mind their ribbing. That night, I stayed in the empty briefing room with a stack of supply reports, fine-tuning numbers for an upcoming operation. The silence of the room didn't feel lonely or oppressive. It felt earned, peaceful mine. Off-duty, my world kept expanding in ways I hadn't thought possible. The boxing classes left me sore but stronger both physically and mentally. Hiking with friends started to feel like a ritual of reclaiming weekends that used to vanish into stress and worry about money. When someone joked about how disciplined and dedicated I was, I laughed along with them. They had no idea how much discipline it had taken to keep secretly paying someone else's mortgage for 3 years while maintaining a military career. Compared to that, showing up for a sunrise run or an evening boxing session was child's play. Even my apartment started reflecting the internal shift. I cleared out piles of things I'd never really wanted, but had kept because I thought they made me look like the responsible daughter my parents expected. I replaced them with things I actually liked and chose for myself healthy plants that brought life to the space. A sturdy oak desk where I could work on my own projects, a new mattress I'd put off buying for far too long because the money always went elsewhere. None of it was flashy or expensive, but all of it was deliberately chosen by me, for me. The next family dinner was less tense than I'd imagined it would be. My parents acted as if our confrontation had never happened, sweeping it under the rug like dust they didn't want guests to see. Vivienne dominated the conversation as usual, showing photos of her latest case victory, her purebred dog, her perfect little Wilmington house with its manicured lawn. I watched quietly, but not with the bitter resentment that used to eat at me from the inside. I felt detached now, like I was observing a play I'd already seen too many times, one where I knew all the lines and no longer cared about the ending. At one point, Dad looked across the table at me, his voice carrying that familiar condescension. "Marlo, are you still working those endless hours? You should learn from your sister here. She knows how to balance her life properly." I met his eyes and smiled. Not a fake smile meant to keep the peace, but a genuine one, because his words no longer had the power to wound me. "I'm balancing things exactly the way I want to, Dad." He didn't press further. Maybe it was the way I said it calm, confident, without seeking his approval. Maybe he sensed that something fundamental had shifted and he no longer had the leverage he once did. Driving home afterward through the familiar streets, I didn't feel gutted or angry like I used to after family dinners. I felt untouchable, like I was wearing invisible armor. They could hang their banners celebrating Vivienne. They could toast her achievements with expensive wine. They could spin whatever narrative made them comfortable. But I wasn't shackled to their story anymore. Back at work, the recognition for my performance grew louder and more frequent. A senior officer stopped me in the hallway after I presented a financial plan for a complex supply chain reroute that would save significant money. "That was sharp thinking, Captain. Really excellent work. You've got a future beyond this post, no question. It wasn't empty flattery. It was validation based on my actual work, my merit, my dedication. Not family name-dropping, not pity, not manipulation. Just me standing on my own achievements. One night, Reeves found me still in the logistics office past 8 o'clock, sleeves rolled up, highlighter marks all over the spreadsheets I was reviewing. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Captain, do you ever actually go home?" I looked up, grinning. "This is going home for me, sir. This is where I build my future." He smirked knowingly. "That fire you've got burning, don't let it go out. The military will try to grind it out of you with bureaucracy and politics. But if you hold on to it, you'll outlast everyone else who gives up." That stuck with me more than almost anything else he'd said. Outlast. Not outshine or outperform necessarily. Just outlast. I'd already been doing it my whole life without realizing it, gritting my teeth through endless comparisons to Vivienne, pushing through years of silence about my sacrifices, carrying weight no one saw or acknowledged. If I could survive all that and come out stronger, thriving in my military career felt almost easy by comparison. Week by week, I felt the old version of myself slipping away like an outgrown uniform. The girl who swallowed her words at family dinners rather than cause a scene. The daughter who lived paycheck to paycheck because of someone else's financial failures. The woman who doubted her own worth every time Vivienne's name was mentioned with reverence. In her place stood someone sharper, clearer, more certain. Someone who wasn't looking for applause or validation. Someone who just wanted the freedom to build her own path without invisible chains holding her back. Late one evening, I jogged along the river trail. The cool air burning in my lungs, the city lights twinkling across the water like scattered diamonds. My legs burned with effort. My chest ached from the pace. But instead of slowing down, I pushed harder, faster. Because the truth was, every mile I ran, every spreadsheet I perfected at work, every punch I landed on the heavy bag at boxing class was proof that I wasn't broken by what had happened with my family. I was forged by it, made stronger, more resilient. And as the skyline faded behind me in the darkness, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger. This was my life, my story, my future, and no one could take that away from me. The knock on my apartment door came on a Saturday afternoon, just as I was putting away groceries, organizing my small kitchen with the kind of care that comes from finally having your own space to maintain. Mrs. Chen, my parents' longtime neighbor from back home, stood there with an uncomfortable smile holding up her phone. "Marlo, honey, I thought you should see this. I drove past your parents' house earlier today to drop off some mail that was delivered to us by mistake." She tapped her screen and held it up for me to see. The photo nearly made me drop the bag of apples I was holding. My knees went weak. Across the entire front of my parents' house, stretched from one end of the porch to the other, was a massive white banner with bold red letters that seemed to scream congratulations. "Vivienne for saving the family home." I stood frozen in my doorway, my mind scrambling desperately to process what I was seeing. But those words kept burning into my consciousness like a brand pressed into my skin. Saving the family home. All the air left my lungs at once. My throat closed so tight I couldn't speak or even breathe properly. Mrs. Chen shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, clearly sensing she'd just delivered devastating news. "Anyway, I thought you should know what they're doing." It didn't seem right to me, knowing what I know. Then she gave a small sympathetic wave and left quickly. The door shut with a soft click and I leaned against it, gripping the bag of groceries so tightly the paper ripped and apples rolled across my floor. They bounced and rolled in different directions, but I couldn't even move to pick them up. My entire body shook with a combination of pure rage and utter disbelief. $84,000. 36 months of sacrifice, 3 years of my life that they had begged for, taken without shame, and then erased completely with a single banner. Not just ignored this time, not just dismissed. Completely erased and rewritten with my sister as the hero. Worse, they'd handed the credit to Vivienne as if I had never existed at all, as if my sacrifice was just a ghost story no one would ever hear. I dropped onto my couch, pulled my hands through my hair, and stared at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. The memories rushed back in a flood I couldn't stop. The late-night desperate calls from Mom, her trembling voice saying, "Just this once, please, we'll lose everything." Dad's hollow promises that next month we'll manage on our own, I swear. All of it, every penny, every sacrifice. every dream I'd put on hold rewritten as my sister's glorious victory. I tried to laugh at the absurdity, but it came out bitter and cracked like something breaking inside me. The sheer audacity of it. The breathtaking cruelty wrapped up in a fake celebration. They hadn't just dismissed me at that dinner table. They had built an entire mythology around Vivienne, complete with a banner big enough for the whole neighborhood to see and believe. I grabbed the folder from my dining table and flipped it open with shaking hands. Pages spilled everywhere across my floor bank transfers, receipts. 3 years of evidence all neatly logged and organized. The proof screamed louder than any banner ever could. Without me, without my money, that house would have been gone 2 years ago. Without my sacrifice, Mom and Dad would have been packing boxes in shame while Vivienne was busy decorating her new kitchen with imported tiles. But instead of gratitude or even acknowledgement, they'd put her on a pedestal and crowned her the savior of the family. I stared at the papers scattered across my floor until my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Then I wiped my eyes hard enough to hurt, stood up with new determination, and started pacing my small apartment. The anger didn't consume me this time. Instead, it crystallized into something harder and clearer. If this was the story they wanted to sell to the world, then I needed to decide how far I was willing to go to make sure the real truth was heard. That night, I barely slept. My laptop glowed in the darkness as I opened a blank spreadsheet and began building something new. I entered every payment methodically, every date, every amount, every broken promise. January 2021, $1,500. February 2021, $2,000. March 2021, $200. 36 rows later, the total glared from the bottom cell in bold red $84,000. I stared at that number until my eyes burned. This wasn't just money anymore. This was my 20s that I'd never get back. This was my chance at home ownership that had slipped away. This was every opportunity I'd had to say no to because my bank account was being drained for someone else's benefit. Next, I pulled up my phone and scrolled through 3 years of text messages from my mother. "Marlo, sweetheart, the company still hasn't recovered. If you don't help this time, the bank will take everything. Please, just this once more. Your father is falling apart. We'll pay you back, I promise." I took screenshots of every single one, my fingers steady despite the rage building in my chest. Then I organized them chronologically and dropped them into a presentation. Labeling each message by date, side by side with the bank transfers, the picture was undeniable and damning. It wasn't generosity on my part. It wasn't occasional help. It was systematic exploitation month after month, disguised as family emergencies that somehow never ended. By 3 in the morning, I had built something Colonel Reeves would have been proud of, a comprehensive briefing deck that told the complete story. Clean, organized, and impossible to argue with. A timeline on one slide, a bar chart on the next showing the steady drain on my finances, screenshots of the pleading texts, and a final total bolded in red that no one could dispute. At the bottom of the last slide, I typed one sentence: "Without me, there would be no home to hang a banner on." When I finally closed the laptop, I didn't feel tired despite the late hour. I felt ready for battle. The following Monday, I walked into work with the same external calm, but something inside me burned with new intensity. While others chatted about their weekend plans and activities, I couldn't shake the image of that banner flying across my parents' porch like a flag of their deception. During lunch, Colonel Reeves stopped by my table, his observant eyes taking in my expression. "Captain, you look like someone preparing for combat." I smirked, meeting his gaze directly. "Maybe I am, sir. Just not the kind you'd expect." He studied me for a moment with those eyes that had seen too much, then nodded slowly. "Then fight it the same way you fight anything else: prepared, precise, and without flinching. Don't let emotion cloud your strategy." His words locked into place in my mind like ammunition being loaded. This wasn't going to be about screaming across a dinner table anymore. This wasn't going to be whispered bitterness or private resentment. If my parents wanted to build a false legend around Vivienne, complete with banners and public celebrations, then I'd make sure everyone saw the truth. And the truth would speak louder than any of their denials. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened the laptop again and ran through the slides like I was practicing for a briefing to the highest command. My voice came out firm and steady, my pacing deliberate and controlled. The numbers weren't just figures on a screen. They were my story, my truth, my evidence. For years, I'd let them paint me as invisible, insignificant, less than. No, I was going to force them to look at what they'd done. I was going to make it impossible for them to ignore or deny. I saved the file 3 times, once on my laptop, once on a USB drive and once to the cloud. Then I slipped the USB into a small black case and set it beside the folder of bank statements on my table. The weight of it felt solid, real, undeniable. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at my small dining table, and let the significance of what I was about to do settle over me. They could hang their banners. They could toast Vivienne with champagne. They could twist the story until it was unrecognizable. But I had the proof, documented and organized. And if the truth embarrassed them, if it shattered the illusion they'd so carefully built, that wasn't my fault. For the first time, I wasn't just imagining standing up to them. I was preparing for it strategically, methodically. And they had no idea what was coming.